a long-haul trucker, you see some weird things. Strange lights in the sky, shadowy figures on the roadside, abandoned cars with their doors open, but no driver in sight. Most of it you chalk up to exhaustion, highway hypnosis, or just a bad case of nerves. But then there are the moments that stick with you, the moments that make you second-guess everything you know about the world. I've been trucking for 15 years. I've had my fair share of eerie nights, lonely highways, and uneasy feelings. But nothing compares to what happened in the mountains of West Virginia one foggy night in late October. A night I still can't explain. I was hauling a load of lumber from a mill in Pennsylvania down to a processing plant in Georgia. Normally I'd take the major interstates, but there had been an accident on I-79, and my dispatcher rerouted me through the back roads of the Appalachian Mountains. I'd been through that area before. It wasn't my first choice, but it wasn't a big deal. The road was narrow and winding, but my GPS assured me it would save time. As the night wore on, the road got darker. No street lights, no houses, no cars, just trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. The kind of darkness that felt thick, like it pressed in against the truck, swallowing the world outside my windshield. I checked the time, 12:47 a.m. I still had hours to go before I'd reach civilization again. And then the fog rolled in. At first, it drifted lazily over the road in wisps, swirling in the wake of my headlights. But soon, it thickened into a dense wall of white, so heavy I had to slow to 20 miles per hour just to see a few feet in front of me. It was the kind of fog that messes with your mind. You start seeing shapes, movement, and then I saw him. At first, I thought it was just another shadow, maybe a trick of the fog or a tree leaning too close to the pavement. But as I crept forward, my stomach tightened. A man stood in the middle of the road. Tall, unnaturally thin, completely still. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding slightly against the damp pavement. Trailer groaned from the sudden stop, my load shifting behind me. I sat there, gripping the wheel, heart pounding in my chest. He didn't move. He wasn't waving for help, he wasn't walking, he just stood there. I turned my high beams on, hoping to get a better look. That was my first mistake. His face, if you could call it that, was wrong. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over a blank canvas where his features should have been. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, slowly, the man tilted his head, like he was studying me. Deep, primal fear gripped my chest. I didn't know why, but every instinct in my body screamed, "Do not get out of the truck." As I sat there, frozen in place, my CB radio crackled to life. At first, just static. Then, a faint voice. "He's watching you." I grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" Silence. More static. And then, in a whisper, "Don't look away." My hands tightened around the wheel. I was shaking, sweat dripping down my forehead despite the cold. The man took a step forward, then another. His movements were unnatural, slow, deliberate, like he was gliding rather than walking. I threw the truck into reverse, my tires spinning against the asphalt. The figure didn't run, didn't react. But somehow, he was getting closer. The fog around him thickened, swirling, moving with him. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In my side mirrors. There were more of them. Shapes. Dozens of them, standing in the fog on either side of the road. Watching. Waiting. I slammed the gas and sped forward. I don't know how long I drove, but at some point, I realized the road ahead wasn't right. My GPS showed I was still on Route 33, but my surroundings had changed. The asphalt looked older, cracked and faded, like it hadn't been maintained in decades. The trees lining the road weren't trees anymore. Their trunks twisted in unnatural angles, gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The fog never cleared. If anything, it got thicker. Then, I saw it. A sign on the side of the road, rusted and barely legible. Welcome to Stillbrook. Stillbrook? I'd never heard of it. It wasn't on any map, but my GPS insisted I was still on Route 33. My radio crackled again. Turn around before it's too late. And then laughter. Low, raspy, coming from the sleeper berth behind me. I whipped around so fast my seatbelt cut into my shoulder. The bunk was empty, but I felt it. Something was back there, watching. A shape shifted in the darkness, and then breathing. Not mine. Slow, ragged breaths filled the cab, coming from right behind my seat. I didn't look. I didn't turn around. I did the only thing I could. I slammed the brakes. The moment my truck skidded to a stop, the fog evaporated, like it had never been there. I looked around. The twisted trees were gone. The road was normal again. And that rusted Stillbrook sign, it wasn't there anymore. Just empty highway stretching into the darkness. My CB radio crackled one last time. A different voice this time. Gravelly, deep. You got lucky, trucker. Then silence. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next truck stop, hours later. I staggered inside, shaking, barely able to breathe. An older trucker sitting at the counter noticed me. You look like you've seen a ghost. I hesitated. Then I told him. The fog, the faceless man, the whispers on the radio. His face paled. After a long pause, he muttered, You took Route 33, didn't you? I nodded. He let out a breath. You ever hear of the Stillbrook Massacre? I shook my head. Back in the 50s, a whole town vanished, gone overnight. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just gone. They say if you drive that road on the wrong night, the town finds you instead. I haven't taken Route 33 since, and I never drive in thick fog, because sometimes the road takes you somewhere you're not supposed to go. If you've ever driven long-haul routes, you know the golden rule. Never pick up hitchhikers. It's not just about safety, it's about survival. I've heard too many stories about truckers disappearing, found dead in their cabs, or worse, never found at all. But sometimes the choice isn't yours. Sometimes they get in anyway. This happened to me 5 years ago. I was hauling a refrigerated load from Texas to California. The route was a straight shot down I-10, passing through long stretches of open desert where there was nothing. No gas stations, no towns, no lights. Just sand, sky, and a road that never seemed to end. I was driving through Arizona when I saw him. Hitchhiker standing on the shoulder. The middle of nowhere, no car in sight. He was wearing all black, head down, hood pulled over his face. As I passed, something about him made my stomach twist. I only caught a glimpse, but for a split second, I could have sworn he didn't have a face. Just smooth, blank skin beneath the hood. I shook it off. I was exhausted, running on caffeine and bad gas station burritos. I must have imagined it. But when I checked my mirror, he was still there, standing in the exact same spot, like I'd never passed him at all. I pushed the thought out of my mind and kept driving. Another 100 miles, no cars, no exits, just the same lonely desert road. Then, something moved in my mirror. A shadow. Something in my truck. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was alone. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't picked anyone up. But I could feel it now. Something behind me, in the sleeper berth. A presence. I turned up the radio, trying to drown out my thoughts. And that's when I heard it. A slow, rasping breath. Not mine. Coming from right behind my seat. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself I was imagining it. Highway hypnosis, lack of sleep, maybe even just the hum of the engine playing tricks on my ears. Then I saw something in the side mirror, a face, staring out at me from the curtains separating the cab from the sleeper berth. Only it wasn't a face, just blank skin stretched over where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. I almost lost control of the truck. I swerved, tires screaming against the pavement, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands. By the time I looked back, the face was gone. The curtain was still. The sleeper berth was silent. My CB radio crackled. Static at first, then, "Don't stop." A whisper, garbled, distant. I snatched up the receiver. "Who is this?" More static. Then, faintly, "He's with you now." I nearly threw the radio out the window. My GPS screen glitched, flickering in and out. I glanced at the road ahead. A rest stop sign loomed in the distance. Normally, I wouldn't pull over, not in the middle of the night, not in a deserted area like this. But I couldn't keep driving. I needed to check my truck. I had to prove to myself that I was alone. I pulled into the rest stop, headlights cutting through the darkness. There were no other cars, no lights, just a single empty building with boarded up windows. Something about it felt wrong. I left the engine running and grabbed a flashlight. I checked the trailer first. Locked, sealed, no signs of tampering. Then I turned toward the cab, and my heart stopped. The passenger door was open, not just unlocked, wide open, like someone had gotten out. I hadn't stopped since Texas. I felt something watching me. From the trees, from the darkness. Then I saw the footprints, leading away from the truck. I shined my flashlight toward the footprints. They led to the edge of the desert where the pavement met the sand. And there, standing just at the limit of my light's reach, was him, the hitchhiker. No face, no movement, just standing there, waiting. And then he started walking toward me. I ran. I jumped into the truck, slammed the door, locked it, and floored the gas pedal. My tires kicked up gravel as I sped back onto the highway. I didn't look back. I drove for hours. At some point, I checked my GPS, and what I saw made no sense. It showed a reroute, a long, winding path leading into the desert. No roads, no highways, just off into the sand. And the estimated arrival time? 3:33 a.m. I unplugged it, tossed it onto the passenger's seat, and I kept driving. At sunrise, I reached a truck stop just outside of Phoenix. Stumbled inside, exhausted, barely able to think. An old-timer trucker noticed me. "You all right, son?" I hesitated. Then I told him about the hitchhiker, the thing in my truck, the GPS route leading to nowhere. His face darkened. "You've been driving long?" he asked. I nodded. 15 years. He leaned in, lowered his voice. "You ever hear of the writer?" I shook my head. "They say he's a lost soul," the old man continued. "Used to be a trucker himself, but one night he picked up a hitchhiker who wasn't human, and that was the last anyone ever saw of him." He paused. "They say he still rides, still tries to find his way home, but he never will." He patted my shoulder. "If you see him again, don't stop. I've never taken I-10 through Arizona since. And I never drive at night without locking my doors, because some passengers don't wait for an invitation. They just get in." I've been a trucker for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot on the road. Strange things, weird people, places that feel off for no explainable reason. But this is the one I still dream about. The one that makes me hesitant to drive certain routes alone. The one that makes me check my mirrors just a little too often. Because some things you see on the road aren't meant to be seen. It was a winter night in 2017, and I was hauling a load through West Virginia. If you've never driven those back roads at night, let me paint a picture for you. Tall, skeletal trees on either side of the highway, no lights, no towns for miles, just an endless stretch of black road cutting through dense, dark woods. Wolf. It was a cold night, and the road was covered in a thin layer of frost. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog rolling in from the trees. I was alone on the road, no other cars, no other trucks. Just me, or so I thought. Around 2:30 a.m., I saw her, standing on the side of the road, near a narrow ditch filled with dead leaves and ice. A woman. She wore a thin, torn dress, no coat, no shoes. Her hair hung limp over her face. And she was staring right at me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep driving. But something about her. She didn't move, didn't flinch from the wind, didn't react to my 18-wheeler barreling toward her. I slowed down just slightly, flicking my high beams on, and that's when I saw it. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating, just inches above the frost-covered grass. I slammed on the gas, blew past her at 70 miles per hour, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I passed, she turned her head to follow me. No emotion, no expression, just watching. Then, just as I was about to lose sight of her in my side mirror, she grinned. Not a normal grin, not a human grin. Her mouth stretched too wide, her lips pulling back farther than they should have been able to go. Her teeth were wrong, sharper, jagged, too many of them. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I floored it down the highway, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I've seen weird things on the road before, but this was something else. I drove for another 30 miles, white-knuckling the steering wheel, refusing to check my mirrors. Then, my CB radio crackled. Static at first, then a faint voice. "Don't look at her." My stomach turned. I grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, "She's in your truck." My blood ran cold. I glanced at my passenger seat. Empty. Then, hesitantly, I looked at my mirrors, and I saw her, in the reflection of my side mirror, sitting in my sleeper berth. She was smiling, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her eyes locked onto mine. I swerved, nearly running off the road. When I looked again, she was gone, but I knew she was still there. I could feel her, breathing, watching, waiting. By the time I reached a truck stop, I was drenched in sweat, shaking. I parked, shut off the engine, and jumped out of my truck so fast you'd think the damn thing was on fire. I needed people around me. I rushed inside the diner, ordered the strongest coffee they had, and sat in the corner trying to calm down. That's when an old man, a fellow trucker, sat down across from me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I gave him a weak chuckle. "Something like that." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You were on Route 19, weren't you?" I froze. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "You saw the woman in the ditch." My throat went dry. "You're not the first," he continued. "Won't be the last." I swallowed. "Who or what is she?" The old man leaned in, lowering his voice. "Back in the 1950s, a young woman was hitchhiking on that stretch of road, got picked up by a man driving a beat-up old pickup. His eyes darkened. He took her into the woods, did terrible things to her, and when he was done, he dumped her body in that ditch." I shivered. "They never caught him," the old man said. "But people started seeing her after that, always in the same spot, just standing there, watching." I stared down at my coffee, my hands still trembling. "She follows some people," he added, "the unlucky ones." I looked up. "How do you know if you're one of them?" He sighed again, shaking his head. If she smiles at you, he paused, eyes filled with something close to pity. Then it's already too late. I didn't finish my coffee. I didn't even sleep that night. I sat in that diner until the sun rose, until there were people around, until I felt safe enough to go back to my truck. I opened the door, holding my breath. Everything looked normal. The sleeper berth was empty. The passenger seat was clear. But when I sat down, ready to start the engine, my CB radio crackled. A faint, whispering laughter filled the cab. And then, through the static, "See you soon." I floored it out of that truck stop and never took Route 19 again. Some roads, you just don't drive twice. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling tales of the paranormal.